It all started on a regular Sunday morning when I received a call that would turn my world upside down. I was sitting in my small apartment, sipping on coffee, when I glanced at the phone screen. It was the realtor handling the sale of our family home. I'd been hearing about the upcoming sale for months, and I assumed everything was going smoothly. But the voice on the other end didn't sound as cheerful as usual. "Melanie," he began, "I need to talk to you about something serious regarding the sale of the house." I felt my stomach drop. My family home, my childhood home, was finally being sold after my parents' decision to downsize. It was a decision I had mixed feelings about, but I respected their choice. I'd always thought of that place as my sanctuary, filled with memories of summers spent running through the garden, Christmases by the fireplace, and family dinners around the old oak table. But what I didn't know was that something was terribly wrong. The realtor informed me that the house had been sold, but the price was way lower than what it should have been, far below market value. It didn't make sense. My mind raced as I tried to process the news. Why would my parents, who were always so careful with money, let the house go for so little? I knew something was off. The deal felt rushed, and the price was unusually low. I had to figure out why. When I confronted my parents that evening, the tension was thick. They sat at the dinner table, acting as if nothing had happened. My mom kept her eyes on her plate, avoiding my gaze. Dad seemed unusually quiet, and that familiar unease in his expression only made me more suspicious. I asked them outright, "Why did you sell the house for less than it's worth? That property could have brought in so much more money. Did you even consider how it would affect me?" Dad looked uncomfortable, but finally sighed and said, "It's what we needed to do, Mel. We thought it was the right choice. We're trying to simplify things." His voice sounded rehearsed, like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear. But something in my gut told me it wasn't the whole truth. There had to be more to this. After some more prodding, my father reluctantly admitted that they had sold it to a close family friend, someone they trusted. My initial shock turned into confusion. But why would they do that if they were just trying to simplify things? Then, I started to wonder if they were hiding something else from me. Something deeper, something I wasn't ready to hear. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. So, I took matters into my own hands and asked a lawyer to look into the sale. The moment I saw the documents, I knew I had uncovered a secret. Hidden in the fine print was a clause, buried deep within the legal jargon, that explained everything. The clause wasn't just about selling the house at a lower price, it had a condition attached to it. A condition that would allow the buyer to make extensive renovations to the property, increasing its value dramatically. Even more shocking was the revelation that my parents had agreed to let the buyer remodel the house in ways that would erase the very essence of what it had always been. The beautiful old garden, the rooms where I had spent my childhood. Everything was about to be torn apart. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My heart sank as I realized that my parents had sold our family's history for what seemed like nothing more than a quick fix. They had given up the house not just for a financial deal, but to please someone else. But the worst part? They hadn't even told me about this clause. The house, my memories, were being sold off in pieces to the highest bidder, all under the guise of simplifying their lives. My mind raced as I realized I had to confront my parents again. This time, it wasn't just about asking questions. It was about fighting for what was mine. I gathered all my courage and went to their house the next evening. When I walked in, I barely recognized the parents who had once been my pillars. They were different now, not the people I'd grown up with. When I showed them the clause, I could see the shock on their faces. It was a moment of pure disbelief. Mom tried to defend herself, saying that they thought it was the best option at the time. "We didn't think you'd mind," she said, her voice shaky. "We thought you were okay with the sale." But I couldn't stop myself. I pointed out that they never even asked me. They hadn't considered how much that house meant to me, how much it meant to our family. The house wasn't just a property to me, it was my heritage, my connection to everything I had known growing up. How could they just hand it over without considering how I felt? Without asking if I wanted to keep it in the family? Dad sat there in silence, looking guilty. Mel, I didn't want to burden you with this. We thought it was easier this way, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But I couldn't let them off that easy. It's not easier, I shot back. You didn't just sell a house, you sold a part of me too. But as the conversation dragged on, the anger and frustration slowly turned into something else. Understanding. For the first time, I saw it. They hadn't done this out of malice. My parents were trying to protect me in their own way, not understanding how their decisions would hurt me. They thought I had moved on from the family home. They thought I didn't care. But they were wrong. The house was more than bricks and wood. It was the place where our family had grown, loved, and lived. And then, as the conversation quieted, I made a decision. I didn't want the house to go to waste, not like this. I didn't want to fight anymore. I wanted us to fix this, to come together and restore what was ours. Maybe the sale couldn't be undone, but I wasn't going to let the house become just another transaction. The memories it held were worth more than any financial deal. The people who had loved it deserved better than to have it disappear. In the end, it wasn't just the house that needed fixing. It was my relationship with my parents. We hadn't been honest with each other, and that had caused so much pain. But this was our chance to rebuild, together. And though the house would never be the same, I realized it didn't have to be. The value of family, of standing together, was something that couldn't be sold for any price. The days following the confrontation with my parents were filled with a mix of emotions. My mind kept replaying that dinner, the way my father looked when he admitted his mistakes, and the heavy silence that followed. Part of me wanted to push harder, to keep fighting until I got exactly what I thought I deserved. But another part of me, a quieter voice, told me that maybe there was more to the story. I knew my parents weren't malicious. They had always done their best to care for me in their own way, even if it didn't always line up with what I wanted or needed. But the truth behind that secret clause, it gnawed at me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little I actually knew about the real reasons they sold the house. The trust I had in them, the feeling that we were a united family, was slowly unraveling. I decided to dig deeper, not just for answers, but for understanding. I had to know everything. Why they'd made such a drastic decision, why they didn't include me in the process, and why they hadn't told me about the clause. I spent the next few days scouring the documents I had received, trying to find any other hidden details. The contract was riddled with legal jargon, and I was no expert, but I knew enough to understand that something didn't add up. The clause about renovations was unsettling, but there were other details too. Tiny red flags that I had missed earlier. There were mentions of connections my parents had with the buyers, but these weren't just casual acquaintances. The names were people they had known for years, long before they even thought about selling the house. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something more personal was at play here. I decided to reach out to an old family friend who had worked as a lawyer for a short time when I was a kid. His name was David, and he had always been someone I could trust to be straightforward with me. I hoped that he could help me make sense of what I was looking at. When I called him, he agreed to meet with me the next afternoon. We sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of town, and I handed him the stack of papers. As he read through the documents, I couldn't help but feel like I was on the verge of discovering something I wasn't ready to hear. I had already uncovered the clause, but now it seemed like I was chasing shadows. What if my parents' choices weren't as innocent as they seemed? What if there was something darker lurking behind their actions? David looked up from the papers after a few minutes, his expression grave. "Melanie," he began. There's something you need to know about this clause. It's not just a standard agreement. It's a deliberate move. Your parents weren't forced into it. They chose it. And there's more to it than you realize. I felt my heart race. What do you mean? What are you saying? David's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I don't think your parents realized what they were signing, but the buyer knew exactly what they were doing. This clause, it's not just for renovations. It's part of a long-standing deal between your family and the buyer, something that goes back years. Your parents were involved in business with this person, and I'm not sure they fully understood the impact of this decision. Everything around me seemed to blur as I processed David's words. Business? A long-standing deal? My parents had never mentioned anything like that to me. They had been so secretive about their finances over the years, but I never thought they were hiding something this big. I asked him to dig deeper, and over the next few days, I learned that the buyer wasn't just a casual acquaintance. They were deeply involved with my father in an old, failed business venture. The house was being sold for a fraction of its worth because the buyer had agreed to take over the remaining debts my father had accumulated over the years. It wasn't just about money. It was about a past my father had never shared with me. A past filled with mistakes and bad decisions that had slowly bled into our present. He had been trying to cover up his past failures for years, and now, it seemed like it was all coming to a head. I couldn't believe what I was learning. My parents had sold the house, not because they wanted to downsize or simplify their lives, but because they had been trying to fix their financial mistakes. Mistakes I had no idea existed. And the house, my childhood home, was the collateral. The more I thought about it, the more angry and hurt I became. They had made decisions without me, without considering how I would feel. They had sacrificed something precious to save face, to protect their own reputation. The house had always been a symbol of stability for me, and to see it used as a pawn in their personal battles felt like a betrayal. But it was also a wake-up call. I couldn't just let this go. I had to confront them again, not just to demand answers, but to make them understand that I wasn't going to stand by while they made decisions that impacted me and my future. I wasn't just going to let them sweep everything under the rug. I picked up the phone, dialed my parents' number, and waited as it rang. When my mom answered, I didn't waste any time. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady but filled with determination. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with the next section. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Mom was in the kitchen, moving around silently, avoiding my gaze as she cleaned up the counter. Dad sat on the couch, his eyes fixed on the television but not really watching it. I could tell he was waiting for me to speak first, probably dreading the conversation that was about to unfold. Mom, Dad, I need you to explain something to me, I said, my voice calm but resolute. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I had already learned more than I could handle, but I needed them to tell me the rest of the story. I know about the clause in the sale documents. I know why you sold the house for so little, and I'm not leaving here until I hear it from you. Mom's hands froze mid-motion, and Dad sat up straighter on the couch. I could feel the tension rising, the walls they had put up between us slowly starting to crumble. For a moment, no one said anything, and the silence felt like it was going to swallow us whole. Finally, Dad spoke. Melanie, we didn't want you to find out this way. We didn't want to burden you with this, but the truth is, we didn't have much of a choice. There were debts, things we were trying to keep from you. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain more. The words hung in the air, but it wasn't enough. I needed to know the full picture, not just half the truth. What debts? Why didn't you tell me? This was my home too, Dad. You had no right to sell it like that without talking to me. I deserved to know. My mother stepped forward now, her face filled with regret. We thought we could fix things without involving you. We didn't want you to worry about the business and the mess your father got us into years ago." She paused, her voice breaking as she continued. "It was a series of bad investments, things we didn't want to admit. We had to sell the house to pay off some of those debts, Melanie. It wasn't about the money for us. It was about survival." I shook my head, struggling to process what they were telling me. All this time, I thought they had been fine. They had always given off the impression that everything was in order, that we were comfortable. But now I understood. They had been hiding their struggles from me, trying to protect me from the reality of their financial troubles. "So, you decided to sell the one thing that tied us all together. The one thing that kept us grounded?" I said bitterly. "You didn't even think to ask me. This house meant everything to me, and now I find out you gave it away to settle debts, without considering what I might want." Dad's face tightened, and I could see how much he regretted not telling me sooner. "I didn't want you to have to carry that burden. It was my mistake, my problem. I thought if I sold the house, we could fix everything and move on. But it wasn't the right decision, and I'm sorry for that, Mel." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at them for making such a huge decision without me, for not trusting me enough to be part of it. But deep down, I understood. They hadn't been trying to hurt me. They had just been trying to protect me in the only way they knew how. They hadn't realized how much I needed to be a part of it, how much I needed to know the truth. There was a long pause as we all sat there, the weight of the situation sinking in. I didn't know what to say anymore. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with a sense of loss. My home was gone, and there was nothing I could do to bring it back. "You should have trusted me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Dad nodded slowly, his face full of regret. "I know, and for that, I'm sorry." I could see the cracks in their armor now, the guilt, the shame they had been carrying all these years. They had never meant for things to turn out like this. They had just been trying to keep everything together, trying to make sure I didn't have to deal with their mistakes. But now, it was all out in the open, and there was no pretending anymore. "Is there anything we can do?" Mom asked quietly. "Anything at all to fix this?" I thought about that for a moment. It was hard to imagine how anything could ever be fixed. The house was gone, and it wasn't just the property that had been sold. It was the memories, the history, the part of me that had always been tied to it. But I didn't want to live in anger. I didn't want to hold on to this bitterness that was slowly eating away at me. I took a deep breath and looked at them both. "We can't undo what's been done," I said softly, "but we can start again. We need to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets. If we're going to rebuild, we need to do it together. And I need to know that you trust me enough to be a part of those decisions." Mom and Dad exchanged a look, and I saw something shift in their eyes. The walls that had separated us seemed to be crumbling away, piece by piece. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were a family again. We might not be able to fix everything right away, but this was a start. "Okay," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll do better. I promise." And just like that, the weight of the past few days lifted, if only for a moment. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and the pain of losing the house wouldn't go away overnight. But I realized that sometimes healing wasn't about fixing everything. It was about taking small steps forward, together. We sat there for a while, not saying much. I don't know if we were all processing the same things, but I knew one thing for sure. We had a long road ahead, but we were on it together now, and that was something I could hold on to. Let me know if you want me to continue with the next section. The following days were filled with a quiet kind of tension. My parents and I had come to some kind of understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all just pretending like everything was going to be okay. The house was gone, and with it, a part of my past that I had always believed would be there. But I had to keep reminding myself that there was more to family than a property, more than just walls and windows. We could rebuild in different ways. I kept thinking about what I had learned: the clause, the hidden deal, the debts. And every time I thought about it, I became more and more unsettled. It wasn't just about the money they owed, it was the lies they had built around it, the secrecy, the way they had protected me from the truth, but only made things worse in the end. I needed to know everything. I needed answers. So I reached out to David again. The more I reflected on what he had told me, the more it didn't sit right. He had said the buyer wasn't just a stranger, they were tied to my parents in ways I hadn't known about. And if that was the case, I needed to get the full picture. I had to know who they were and what their involvement had been. Maybe there was more to this story than just a financial mess. I met David the next day, and this time, there was a new sense of urgency in my heart. The questions burned inside me, and I couldn't let them go unanswered any longer. As soon as I sat down, I told him, "I need you to tell me everything you know about the buyer. I need to understand the deal. Why did they sell to them? What was really going on?" David took a deep breath, and I could see that he wasn't sure if he should go any further. "Melanie," he said cautiously, "I think you're about to hear things that might make you question everything. But you have a right to know, so I'll give you the full picture, even if it's not what you want to hear." I leaned forward, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Tell me." David reached into his bag and pulled out a few more documents, ones that he had dug up during his investigation. These weren't part of the original paperwork I had seen. They were older, buried in a history that went back years. As I looked through them, I could feel the weight of each word. My stomach twisted with a growing sense of unease. "This buyer, Melanie," David began, "isn't just a random person looking for a good deal. This is someone your father has known for a long time. Their relationship goes back decades, to a time when your father was involved in a business venture that failed. It was an investment, one that left your parents struggling for years. The buyer was one of the people who came in to help bail them out. But there's more to it than that." My mind raced as I processed his words. A failed business venture? A long-standing relationship? I had never been told about any of this. I'd known about the usual family finances, the mortgage, the bills, the regular struggles, but nothing like this. David continued, "The house was always going to be part of the deal. Your father never intended to keep it. The buyer has been waiting for the right moment to take it. They made a deal years ago, a verbal agreement that once the debts became too much, your family would sell the house to them for pennies on the dollar. That's why the clause was added. It wasn't just about renovations, it was a way to guarantee the buyer's profit. Your family's debt was secured through this house." I felt my blood run cold. My heart hammered in my chest. This was worse than I had imagined. The house had never truly been ours to keep. It had always been part of someone else's plan. My parents had sold it not out of necessity, but as part of a much larger scheme. A scheme they had entered into long ago, without telling me. I sat there for a long moment, trying to process everything. My mind was spinning, and I could barely make sense of it. I kept replaying David's words in my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. My parents had kept me in the dark for so long. The house wasn't just a house, it was a pawn in a much bigger game. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice small. "How do I even confront them with this?" David's face softened. "I don't have all the answers, Melanie. But you deserve the truth. And sometimes, the truth isn't easy to face. If you want to rebuild trust with your parents, you'll have to confront them with this. It's going to be painful, but it's the only way forward." I nodded, my stomach in knots. Confronting my parents again felt like a daunting task, but I couldn't leave things unsaid. I had to find a way to make them understand the gravity of what they had done. Not just to me, but to the family we had built together. Later that evening, as I drove back to my parents' house, my thoughts raced. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I had to be brave. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about everything that had been swept under the rug, all the secrets and lies that had festered for too long. When I arrived, my parents were already sitting at the kitchen table, looking as if they knew something was coming. I didn't waste any time. "I know everything," I said, my voice steady despite the fear inside me. "I know about the deal. I know about the buyer. And I know about the debts you've been hiding from me for years." Their faces drained of color as I laid out everything I had learned. The guilt was evident in their eyes, but it was too late for excuses. They had kept me in the dark, and now I needed to hear the truth, every last bit of it. My father was the first to speak, his voice breaking. "Mel, I didn't want you to know. I thought if I kept it from you, I was protecting you. But I see now how wrong I was. You deserve to know everything. I was just trying to keep our family afloat." The weight of his words hit me hard, and I could see the shame in his eyes. My mother reached out to me, her hand trembling. "We never meant for it to go this far," she said softly. "We thought we were doing the right thing. But we were wrong. We should have told you." I felt a surge of anger, but also a deep sadness. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about years of secrets, years of choices that had been made without me. I had to decide what to do with all this newfound information. But one thing was clear. I couldn't just move on. The trust had been broken, and now I had to figure out how to rebuild it. The days that followed that conversation with my parents were the hardest I had ever experienced. I had confronted them with everything I had learned, hoping for some kind of resolution, but the truth had been too much for all of us to bear. The silence between us was deafening at times, each of us processing the weight of the past few days in our own way. My father seemed distant, retreating into himself, while my mother hovered around, trying to do anything that might make things feel normal again. But nothing felt normal. I didn't know how to fix this. The house was gone, and with it, the memories and the sense of security I had once felt. But I had to try. I couldn't just let my parents' mistakes define our future. So, I made a decision. I would help them rebuild, not just our family, but the trust we had lost. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But I had to believe that it was possible. I spent the next few weeks visiting them regularly. We would sit together in silence sometimes, but slowly, we began to talk more openly about everything, about the mistakes, about the secrets, and about what we could do next. It was exhausting, and there were still moments when the old anger would rise up in me. But I didn't let it control me. I knew that this wasn't just about my parents. It was about me too. I had to forgive them, not just for my sake but for our future as a family. It wasn't just about the house anymore. We started working on things that really mattered, healing the wounds we had buried for years. I helped my father with some of his financial work, going through old bills and debts with him. It was hard, but it was also a way of facing the past, not hiding from it. My mother and I spent hours in the kitchen, cooking together like we used to when I was younger. It was simple, but it was something we both needed. The small steps we took every day to rebuild our relationship made the big, painful moments a little easier to handle. But it wasn't until one afternoon, when I was sitting on the front porch with my father, that I realized how far we had come. He had been quiet for most of the day, but as the sun set, he turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerable, regretful, but also hopeful. "I'm sorry for everything, Mel," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't realize how much I had shut you out. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I was just pushing you away. You were right to be angry, and I'm proud of you for sticking with us, for giving us a chance to fix things." My heart ached as I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long while. I had been so angry for so long, but hearing him say those words made something shift inside me. I realized that this wasn't just about the house or the deal or the lies. It was about learning to forgive, learning to let go of the past and move forward, no matter how messy it had been. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. But it's not just about fixing what was broken. It's about understanding each other, being honest with one another from here on out. He nodded slowly, his eyes filling with tears. I promise, Mel. From now on, no more secrets. And in that moment, I knew that while we couldn't change what had happened, we could start fresh. The house had been sold, yes, but there were still so many things left to rebuild. Our family, our trust, our connection to each other. And even though it was going to take time, I knew we were heading in the right direction. It had been several months since I had confronted my parents about the sale of our family home, and things had slowly begun to fall into place. The house was still gone, and the memories that had once filled its rooms would never be the same. But what I had gained, was something far more important. I had learned that the value of a home wasn't just in its walls or its location. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about the people in it, the memories we created, and the love that made it a home. The house might have been sold, but our family hadn't been sold with it. The bond we shared couldn't be taken away, no matter what had happened in the past. As I sat on the porch of my parents' new, smaller house, I watched the sun dip below the horizon. My father was fixing up the small garden in the backyard. Something simple, but it was a step toward reclaiming the sense of home that we had lost. My mother was in the kitchen, humming a familiar tune as she prepared dinner. It felt peaceful. I couldn't help but smile. The journey hadn't been easy. We had faced the uncomfortable truths, the secrets that had torn us apart, and the anger that had festered for so long. But we had also faced our mistakes, learned from them, and slowly started to heal. And in the end, I realized that sometimes the most painful experiences are the ones that teach us the most about ourselves and the people we love. As I thought back on everything, the deal with the buyer, the secret clause, and the lies that had been uncovered, I understood something. My parents had made mistakes, and so had I. But we had learned from those mistakes, and that was what mattered. The house was just a house, but the family, the love, the memories, that was what would last. And as I looked out at the small garden my father had been working on, I realized that this was just the beginning of something new. Our family might have lost the house, but we hadn't lost each other. We were rebuilding, not just a garden, not just a home, but the trust and love that had always been at the heart of our family. And that, in the end, was worth far more than any property could ever be.